Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. If you do like the programming you see here and the musicians and artists that I visit with, please be sure and hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Iain Clark is an English drummer best known as a member of progressive rock band Cressida. Iain's first band was Mustard, with whom he would play in the late 60s. Then came Cressida, who formed in 1968 and would disband in 1970. The unit released two studio albums in 1970 and 1971. The advent of the new millennium has seen the release of a compilation album, an album of lost tapes, as well as a box set including all of the above. Iain would play in a reformed Cressida from the period 2011 to 2013. Post Cressida, Iain would go on to play with Uriah Heep and record the 1971 album Look at Yourself. Mr. Clark would also play on the 1971 live tour. In 2020, under the moniker Twisted Blues, Iain would release the blues album Euterpe Street, with proceeds from the sale going to the Liam Colgan Music Fund. Today, my guest lives in the Scottish Highlands and is retired but staying very busy. Well, welcome, Iain.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, take us back. Where were you born?
I was born in North London, in a place called Harrow, and I lived in a place called Wembley.
Oh, okay. The famous stadium. Yes,
Yes.
yes. I've learned doing these interviews that there's also a smaller venue there, Wembley, at Wembley, that a lot of bands played.
That would be the Empire Pool, which is on the same site as the stadium.
Okay.
My claim to fame as a small boy, I used to, and I was in the Boy Scouts in those days,
Okay.
and we used to go along and act as, if you like, guides to visitors that were coming in for games and matches, and we get to see them all free simply for showing people to their seats. So very good.
Oh, that was a bonus,
It
definitely.
was. It was a big bonus.
Right, right. I talked to a couple of musicians that handed out flyers,
Yeah,
for the gigs, and they got to go in free by doing
yeah,
that too.
yeah.
Well, as far as your early childhood, do you remember hearing music in the household?
I certainly do. The very first record I bought was The Shadows, which was
Oh,
a British beat group,
yes.
um, instrumental. Um, but Hank Marvin, the lead guitarist, was hugely influential on Clapton and Beck and Brian May and David Gilmour and Jimmy Page. I mean, he was the man that started it here. And they
Yes.
were originally the backing band for Cliff Richard, which was Britain's little local Elvis Presley impersonator at the beginning. But the Shadows went on to make huge success of their instrumentals. So that was my first record. But the first record I really remember hearing, and it scared the living daylights out of me, was visiting a friend of my parents, and I heard Little Richard on the radio for the first time, screaming and singing in a way that was like, what is that? But
That's right.
anyway, yeah, that was my really first memory, probably back in around about 1955, 56, something like that.
Yes, yes. Oh, Little Richard, how influential. And Hank Marvin, I don't know how many musicians I've talked to cite him as an influence. He's in Australia these
He
days.
is. I
Yes,
believe he now lives out there in Sydney permanently. Yep.
yes. I would love to talk to him. I think I've reached out to him, but haven't heard back. Well, early. When did you? Excuse me. What was the first instrument you learned to play?
Um, Originally, I learned to play the piano, and I come from quite a musical family. Both
Oh, okay.
my father and my grandfather were, very fine pianists, and they basically my parents wanted me to learn to play piano. Unfortunately, I had an awful piano teacher, and therefore I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to do anything else rather than learn to play piano, which is a shame because later on I kind of resented the fact that I'd actually given it up for obvious reasons. But yeah, that was my first instrument. But I had really, from very early on, listening to people like Sandy Nelson and Let There Be Drums and one or two others,
Yeah.
Gene Krupa and stuff. I was absolutely drawn to the drums, and I didn't have a drum kit, but I used to borrow my mother's upturned, waste disposable plastic foot controlled bucket, turn it upside down with a
Yes.
couple of sticks, and that would be, I would play along to that. And that was the start of it for me.
Yeah. Did your parents, how did they like the noise? Did they,
Well, the other thing, you've nailed that because they came from a very classical, you know, upbringing.
yeah.
And when I bought my first rock and roll records, they were seriously disapproved. It was made, my father died when I was 21, but my mother, lived just a few years ago. And when I subsequently played the Royal Albert Hall with Uriah Heep, my mother came along and somehow or other she felt I'd been forgiven because I ended up playing it, one of the most prestigious venues for classical music in this country. Despite the fact it was Uriah Heep. She sat in about 6 rows from the front with her fingers in her ears all the way through. And at the end of each number, she clapped as loud as anybody in the place.
Did she?
Yes, she did indeed.
Yes, I've heard from drummers, that they either had to play in the basement or the
Yeah,
attic or when the
yeah,
parents weren't around,
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, wow. So were they so not real encouraging for you to go into music early on, your
No,
parents?
not really. I mean, it was actually only when I left home um, to go off to teachers training college that I started seriously. I actually, the first week I was there, I bumped into a chap who, in the course of conversation, said, "You don't play the drums, do you?" And I lied and said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Great, I'm putting a band together. Would you be interested?" So I immediately went out and spent my whole first term's grant on
Did you?
buying a drum kit, and that was it. I was in a band, and they really weren't that much better than I was. So
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
way, we got on fine. But that period of 3 years at college
yeah.
was fascinating because it was one of the venues on the circuit for some of the best of the British R&B bands. So I would see bands like the Spencer Davis Group with Steve Winwood when he was just 15 years old playing and singing, and all sorts of bands that would go on to become, really, classic players of their age. People like Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and
Oh,
Eric Clapton. And I used to stand on the side of the stage and watch them, and that was a huge learning opportunity for me that I've never forgotten.
right, right. What about John Mayall?
Yep, saw John Mayall, the Blues Breakers, initially with Clapton,
Yeah.
and then with Peter Green when he
Oh,
joined them. And yeah,
yeah,
no, in a way, it was the absolute heyday of, the British blues and beat scene, as it was,
yeah,
known as.
yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
yeah,
you just hit on one of my idols, Peter Green.
hmm,
And then when he
great
went on with
guitarist.
early Fleetwood Mac, that's
Yeah,
just yeah, it's
yeah.
some of the best material there.
I've
Wow.
got a legion of stories from those days, but
Well,
I
yeah.
won't waste your time.
Well, no, it's not a waste of time. It's not a waste of time
Yeah,
at
yeah.
all.
I'll no doubt some of them will pop out in the light of your
Okay,
question.
they'll filter through.
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll filter in.
Well, speaking of that, what was the first live show that you attended that you went to? Can you remember?
Oh, well, I mean, all the ones I saw when I was at college. So, there would have been dozens of them. I can't honestly remember the very first, but I was, I saw Hendrix play at Marquee. I saw Cream playing in some of their very, very first gigs. And I got to know Ginger Baker a little bit. And so, I was able to sort of hang, after the gig with some of the musicians and the crowd of us that were sort of hanging around because they had blew everybody away. I mean, they were just so loud, so big, and had great players, all of them, all three of them. So.
Okay.
But
Well,
yeah, no, I couldn't, I couldn't honestly remember which was the very first live gig, but there were many of them, and they went on to, whoever it was, probably went on to become quite a well-known artist in the day.
well, right, right. Well, that is going back a few years too. Well, you mentioned a few. Were there other musical influences for you?
Um, I was brought up really in enjoying British blues bands. Um, but that also then took me to start listening to some of their influences, and I started a collection of American blues, and with people like Muddy Waters and Sonny Boy Williamson and so forth, and a lot of those I learnt to play along to, which was relatively simple in comparison with some of the more kind of advanced interpretations of the blues that was going on here in this country.
Right, right.
And obviously, bands like the Beatles were, and the Stones. I saw the Stones playing. Actually, that would have been one of my earliest bands. And in fact, I went to school in North London, and next to us was a church hall, and the Beatles used to rehearse there. And I
Yeah.
remember, and Manfred Mann as well rehearsed there. And we used to leave during the break times and go down and peer over the windows to
Did
see
you?
them rehearsing indoors. Little idea that later on, I'd be making my living out of playing, so yeah, good times.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Those are some nice stories. Right. Well, was there I'm sure there was a, yeah, big music scene around you as a teen.
Yeah,
There for sure. One thing that I'm jealous of, and I tell you guys this across the pond, there was a concert just about every night right over there. And they were affordable, pretty
yeah,
cheap.
yeah,
And over here it's so few and far between that, anybody comes through here. So it's always been like that over here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I have to say, like, I think a lot of British musicians of that ilk in those days, we really look to the States for our influences.
Yeah, yes, yes,
Um,
yes,
yeah, and American musicians,
yes,
by
yes.
and large. And the irony was when I then subsequently went to the States and spoke to American musicians, that they were all looking over this side of the Atlantic
That's
for
that
their influences.
that's right. Yeah.
And we say, well, hang on a second, you guys invented this. You're looking at, John Entwistle as your
Right,
influence, John Entwistle
right,
of The Who, you know.
right. Yeah,
What about James Jameson as, the influences?
yeah,
So it was fascinating to
yeah.
see
I think,
the cross-fertilization, if you like, of the music of that era.
yeah, I think it's that case of the grass is always greener syndrome,
Of course. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it very true because you referred to that, mentioned that earlier about the R&B from over here, that influenced the UK,
Yeah.
boom, was more basic, but you guys turned it into something special. That's what I appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put your own input, your own stamp on it, your
Yeah.
own. And then I think a sense of there's always been for me a sense of melody with British music that a lot of times I don't think we have over here, or at least to my ears, that I appreciate
Sure.
about the
Yeah. Sure.
UK music. I'm an Anglophile, so
Okay.
I'm biased. I'm biased.
I mean, we were all taken with Elvis when he came out. I mean, he set the kind of gold standard. And then the Beatles came and maybe lifted it just a touch higher.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and and they were global influences. I mean, they changed the culture
That's
um, in a way. I mean, obviously they had influences like Dylan and so forth, but there was that kind of cross-fertilization. But the Beatles, in some ways, there's no doubt they'll be playing their songs in 100 years from now, because they are, emblematic of a period in time when we
yes.
were all growing up and thinking,
Yeah,
hey, we can do anything.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think the music is timeless. It really is.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Why so many younger fans today, gravitate to their sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, were you in a band prior to Mustard, or was that your first?
Um, uh, yes, I was, because that band was after I finished college. I came back to London and I taught. I was a teacher, you see, so I taught for a year in one of the roughest districts in London with some really tough kids.
What subjects? What subjects?
What, sorry?
What subjects did you teach?
Oh, I taught English and physical education, but like a lot of teachers, we had to teach everything because we were in such a rough school. It was really more about building up a relationship with the class and
Yeah.
trying to teach them lots of things rather than specializing, and then
Yes.
they were moving from class to class and teacher to teacher, Um, but yeah, so that was, that was interesting times, and I did some recordings with the radio station called Radio Luxembourg, which was a
Oh,
big influence.
right.
And there were just sort of demos and stuff. But whilst I was in teaching, during that year that I've been teaching that my father died, and I decided I wanted to leave teaching and try my hand in music because I knew that's all I really wanted to do. And I met I can't even remember how I met them. There was probably an advert in Melody Maker
Melody
magazine, which was
Maker.
the way
Yeah.
that
Yes.
all
Yes.
musicians
Yeah.
would hook up, and joined this band. Good guitarist. He'd been involved in some. I think the original recordings of Hair, the musical, and
Yeah.
he was one of the band members. And we rehearsed for, months and months and months in a basement in North London. And then there was all sorts of rumors about, various people who would come to see us. We were starving. We were living on baked beans on toast and, and occasional trips back to mother to get a decent meal. But in the end, I kind of knew that that band wasn't going to be going anywhere.
I have to show you. I have this right here. There we go.
Oh, right. Yes.
There's the baked beans on toast.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
This is a it's Hard Up Heroes. It's a bunch of artists that were on Decca that recorded for Decca back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rod, David Bowie, Joe Cocker,
Yes.
Cat Stevens, Steve Marriott,
Yes.
and then
Yes, yes.
John Mayall, Eric that we mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. But
Yeah, yeah.
I got
Interesting.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
do remember one gig that we did with Mustard. It was one of the very few that we did actually. And it was at an Irish wedding held in a sort of kind of drill hall for, a sort of military drill hall. So it
yeah.
was pretty bare. It didn't have a warm ambience. And it was one of those classic situations where one side of the family had ordered the band. And I think the other side of the family had expected something a bit different from this band that was playing, psychedelic music. And a fight broke out, between the two sides of the family. I mean, in the hall. And we were up on stage, and slowly the fight began to sort of get closer and closer. And so we all kind of eventually kind of went off stage. And it was the first gig that my girlfriend at the time ever came to see us at.
Yeah.
And so I was so embarrassed about the fact that this was, and I said, no, I'm quitting this band. I'm getting out of here. And I did. And as a result of that, if it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have joined Cressida and
Oh,
so forth. So yeah, that was Mustard. But
that was Mustard. How long were you guys together?
I think probably about a year and a half, not much more than that. We only probably did about half a dozen gigs in total, so like so many bands, we were like a garage band, as you call them in the States, but we were trying to write our own stuff. And Guy Stevens from Sun
Oh,
Records came and saw us. He
okay.
was the guy that was holding out quite a lot of hope, or we were holding out hope for, but that didn't really come to much. I assume because we probably weren't very good. So it
Okay.
happens. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It does happen. So no recordings, no acetates,
No
anything.
recordings from Mustard that
Oh,
no, but there is a recording which I'll only admit to. I will never play to anybody of of a Radio Luxembourg recording that we did. And it was an interesting lineup. It was during the days of psychedelia stuff. So it had been recorded in, I don't know, 67, 68, something like that. And we had a fairly large lineup. 12-string guitarist who was sort of leader of the band and wrote music. And then we had a keyboard and a bass guitarist. The bass guitarist had been with a band called Gino Washington and the Ram Jam
Oh,
Band.
yes, yes, I'm
And he
familiar.
was really, really superb bassist, who I made connection with for the first time in 30, 40 years, just 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, "Are you the same Iain Clark?" And I went, "Yeah, I am." So I was delighted. Roy, it was his name. But anyway, but we also had a girl singer who was rather glamorous, but in a fairly old-fashioned way. I think her looks owed more to a singer called Susan Morm, who had a couple of hits back then, but it was kind of slightly sort of, overdressed and so on. Definitely not rock and roll.
Yeah.
And then we had a doctor, a guy who was actually a qualified specialist, ear specialist, who played the flute, and two other guys who played cello
Oh,
and bass. And they were military musicians in the guards in Kensington.
is
Okay.
that is that really?
And so they were very, very good musicians because you get incredible grounding. So there must have been about 7 or 8 of us in total.
Yeah.
And the guards, because they would have had shaven heads virtually, used to put on beetle wigs when they
Yes.
came out.
Did
So
they?
we had this extraordinary situation of these two guys playing cello, and they could also play other instruments when they were in the marching band. But they would come out with their beetle wigs and put those on, and we went to Radio Luxembourg and recorded this thing for I think a guy called John Hammond, who was a fairly
Oh,
well-known
yes.
producer at the time. I've
Yes.
still got a copy of that, but nobody is ever going to hear it. Okay.
You're not going to let
Very
them hear
strange.
it.
No, no, absolutely not. No chance.
Well, you mentioned Susan Mom. I have like a best of from her, but another singer from early on, Helen Shapiro.
Oh
I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I
yeah.
reached out to her. She's still around, and she said she's not doing interviews, these days. But yeah, that would have been a nice one, as well.
Yeah.
So,
She was a big star.
oh yeah,
I mean, she was as big as the Beatles when the Beatles was first getting started. I mean, she was topping the bill all over the country. So yeah, and
yeah,
she had some hits. So,
yes.
but
On
part
that,
of the old school, if you like, in those
that's
days,
what
the old school
that's what
was
it
about
was.
the industry, the business, itself. So the
Yes,
managers had come from sort of the vaudeville type backgrounds,
right,
and they had just acquired the new rock and roll, but
right.
really didn't understand what it was that they had,
No,
or how to market and promote them. So,
yeah, they didn't. Unfortunately, yes, yes.
yeah.
Well, how did Cressida get together? Whose idea was the name first off?
Um, I think it was Angus, the singer, and actually the founder of the band. Um, I had answered an advert in the Melody Maker and
Yeah,
went along and met with them, and they were just being formed. Angus and a guy called John Hayworth were writing songs together. Angus and John lived in a flat in Earl's Court Road in Kensington. And so there was a kind of communal scene going on there. And they had a keyboard player, and John Hayworth played lead guitar, and Angus played guitar, and they were looking for a drummer and a bass player. And I came along, and they seemed to be happy with my drumming, and basically uh, took both of us on, Kevin, and that was the lineup for Cressida until the keyboard player left after the first set of, or in the course of making our first set of demos, and he went back up north to, where he had come down to London from. And that was the band, and we rehearsed, but fairly early on, the guy that was managing us at the time had arranged for a chap called Ozzy Byrne, who had been the producer for the Bee Gees' first three or four major hit records. He was an Australian, and he was the one for bringing the Bee Gees from Australia over to the UK. And they were in Australia, the Bee Gees were as big as the Beatles were in a way. They were huge. They had several number one hits. But anyway, it had been arranged for Ozzy to come down and see us. Um, he drove up in a big Rolls Royce. We were all seriously impressed. He obviously had a lot of money. But for whatever reason, he liked us and said, "Yeah, I think I want to sign you." And we then proceeded to virtually sign our lives away without realizing it, in the
Oh,
usual story of all
the usual
bands in
story.
those
Right,
days.
right, right,
Every major band got ripped off royally
right,
in those days because we just didn't have the sort of um, infrastructure
right.
of legal and accountancy advice that is
Yes,
available now
right.
online, basically. I mean, it's,
I
you could
don't,
go
I don't, re
Googling.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was I talked to, but they had an attorney that was the band member, and I said that was a good thing that you did,
Yeah.
So
Sure.
he kept them kind of skirting around
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
issues,
Yeah. Yeah.
and was there.
The,
But go ahead, go ahead.
the industry changed when David Bowie took on the first accountant as his manager. And suddenly the old style managers were disappearing very rapidly and being replaced by a whole generation of younger, either lawyers or accountants who
Right.
went into management.
Yeah,
And, that was a sea change, if you like, in the way that the industry saw itself. So anyway, yep,
yeah,
Ozzy saw us.
yeah.
The other interesting thing was that Ozzy had arranged for a guy called Jack Holtzman to come and see us.
Okay, yes,
Jack
yes, yes.
Holtzman was obviously the founder of Elektra Records,
Yeah,
and Elektra was the coolest label in the world as far as we were all concerned.
yeah,
And in the end, Ozzy decided to go um, with Philips record company. They were about to set up, or had just set up, their own progressive label called Vertigo. Okay.
yeah.
And Olaf Wiper, who was the chairman and the chief exec, he basically signed us. So I think possibly because he wanted to get us before anybody else did, although that may not be the case. I don't know. But anyway, we never signed it. If we had, I think we would have been the first British band on Elektra, which
Oh,
would have been something to be really proud of. I mean, I know they had the Incredible String Band and one or two others, but this would have been 68, 69 at the latest. Um, so we signed with Ozzy and then went in the studio almost immediately, and made some demos.
yeah. But where did you
Um,
record? Where did you record? What studio was it?
Central Sound Studios in Denmark Street in London,
Okay, okay.
where the Stones made some of their early demos. I mean, it was one of, I think, two or maybe even three very small, I mean, tiny when you look back at it now, recording studios in Soho, or in that part of that part of London anyway. And he then hawked the demo tapes around, and basically got the deal with Philips. We went on to Vertigo, and that was the start of Cressida's career. And he, through the management they put together, we started getting quite a lot more gigs, and went and played long tours in Germany at places like what you called it in Hamburg, where the Beatles played them. Did all their stints in Hamburg, and to us it was really our training ground, if you like, and we were playing um, 6 sets a night, 45 minutes on, 15 minutes off, um, just like the Beatles did,
Yes.
The Star
Yeah.
Club in
Star
Adelaide.
Club. Yeah. Star Club. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was, one of the positive good things that we did. We really had an opportunity to hone our skills.
Yes. Well,
Prior to actually doing that, we got a new keyboard player in who was quite brilliant. I mean, when he came for his audition with us, it was really, there was no hesitation that we had found, probably somebody who was up there with Keith Emerson and Rick
oh,
Wakeman and those sorts of people.
right.
And he then fortunately was with us when we recorded the first album and the second album. So he was there from the beginning. But some of the demos, he only played on the later demos, not the early ones.
Not the early ones.
And those are the demos that came up on the album you referred to at the beginning, which obviously was, where we went back and found some of those demo tapes, and somebody said we'd love to, to basically put them on an album, and it became called The Lost Tapes.
The
So
lost tapes.
that's
I like
that's
to, I like when bands do that. I like to hear
mm,
those demos. Sometimes I
mm.
like the demos better than the actual songs on the album.
One of the tracks on that, called Lights in My Mind, which is on the first
Ah,
album.
yeah, 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 yeah.
When we went and recorded in a 16-track studio, not even an 8-track studio in Wessex, to record the first album. I think King Crimson had recorded their first album just a couple of weeks before us. So we went in there and recorded, and we recorded Lights in My Mind, and it was, bigger studio and far more, kind of exotic, equipment, which we didn't hesitate to use if it was available.
Yeah.
But we never captured the essence of that first demo we did. And we all agreed when we
Yes.
listened to the demo
Yeah.
and then heard the proper studio version,
Yeah.
the original demo had, in fact, I think it was something more to do with the raw urgency of it
Right.
that came
Right.
through in the record as opposed to the more polished version that
Yes.
followed on the
Yes.
main album. But I'm
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
we were not in alone in that. I think a lot of bands
A
probably
lot
would
of
look
bands.
back
Yeah.
and
I,
would say
I,
the same thing.
I tend to like that the original, like the more organic, like you
Yeah,
said,
absolutely. Yeah,
right
yeah,
of the
yeah,
moment. Yeah,
yeah,
sometimes you can overdub and to death,
absolutely. Yep, yep,
and songs,
yep,
polished, too polished.
absolutely.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah,
Well,
indeed.
well, well. I have a couple of Cressida CDs. The first album you're referring to, and then I have
Hmm.
the anthology. I have the anthology.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
but from the first, it's a fine prog album. To me, it's one of my favorites of that era. And I'll mention a few of my favorites and get your recollections if you can, if you do remember. Uh, to play your little game.
Yep.
That's not my second favorite on the album. I really like the organ on that one. On
Yeah.
that track. Yeah.
Yep. Um, yeah. I mean, it was one of the first songs I think, that we, got involved in playing. Angus and, I think wrote it. I can't remember now. Angus and John wrote. They did write some together, but they tended to each have their own songs. We were a very democratic band in many ways, um, insofar as we would all put in ideas about arrangements, which I think helped create a kind of unified sound. We didn't have somebody said it has to go like this. They would come, both John and Angus would come with their songs and play them through, normally acoustically, just on a guitar and stuff. And then, the keyboard player would pick up on it, and I would then drop in behind and the bass, and so on. So, it's quite an organic way that we had, if you like, of and sort of democratic way of creating what ultimately was the song that we recorded.
Yeah.
So yeah, to play Little Game as as a particular, favorite, mainly because of the way it descends, the chord
Yeah.
descends.
Yes. Right.
Um, so yeah, yeah. Next.
Next, next, home and where I long to be.
Yeah, that was definitely John Hayworth's, if I remember rightly. Okay, and very fine finger picking.
Yes.
And it had a slightly quirky thing because, the piano came in behind it, and it wasn't a rock song in a way.
No,
It was, kind of,
more classical. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, we knew that there was a thing called progressive music. We didn't set out to record it. It was just, I think, the zeitgeist
Yes.
at the time.
Yes.
I mean, on our days off, we would go up to, or the nights off, to UFO and see Pink Floyd. I mean, we used to rehearse in the same building as Pink Floyd did, and often they would be coming out as we were going in, and vice versa. Um, but that music was beginning to filter out. There was still, the kind of blues channel, but depending on, where you were and what your favorites were, you know, what later became really defined as progressive music. I was just surprised when we reformed to discover that we were being called proto-progressive, which I gather means you were one of the prototypes, if you like, of progressive,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so on.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, no, I mean, looking back now, particularly at some of the longer pieces that we did, which was
Yes.
also, like a lot of artists at the time, especially where they had very well-trained musicians, high quality musicians who had a classical or a jazz background, whether
Yes.
you were a Rod Argent or a Keith Emerson or whatever, would start introducing some of that, if you like, that influences into the music itself. And I think that helped to redefine what was progressive. It wasn't just overblown. It was music where the musicians attempted to look and find it additional ways of bringing in other influences into what was fundamentally, basic songs.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, we always have to have labels, don't we? To
Oh
category,
yeah, 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 yeah,
music. But
yeah.
yeah, Cressida was considered one of the most important cult bands of that era, progressive era. So you another track off of that album. Uh, well, it's the one that you mentioned, "Lights in My Mind." You know,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm not sure I've heard the demo. I'd like to hear that, and compare.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's on the lost tapes. It might be, but anyway, it was. We were very influenced at that time by bands like The Doors and Jefferson Airplane and so on. Um, and I remember going to the Roundhouse Theatre in London to hear on a Sunday afternoon The Doors and Jefferson Airplane, double header.
Oh,
And all but everybody that was, anybody in those days was there that day to see the two of them, because it was the first time they had come to Britain, and of course we knew their music. We all had their albums and so forth. There were one or two other kind of interesting stories around that time. I remember the actual date. I think probably would have been 69. I think I was still in Cressida, or maybe we had just broken up. And like a lot of times in those days, between gigs, you would be doing other things, allied to in the music sector. And I remember being in an office in Oxford Street in London, which was Essex Music Publishing House.
okay.
And a couple of things happened there. On one occasion, this guy came up and said, "Have you got any time to listen to a white pressing that I've just come straight from Olympic Studios? I'd be interested to, for getting feedback." So we went into this small room, and there's a record player on a table in the corner. That was how you actually all listened to music The record was put on the record table and the arm was put on. And,
Yes.
anyway, he put this record on and I nearly ended up on the floor. And it was the first white pressing of With a Little Help from My Friends by
Oh,
Joe Cocker.
was it?
And it was Joe Boyd who'd come straight from the studio with it.
Mhm.
And so I think I was the very first person outside the engineers, the studio crew, and the musicians themselves to hear that. And it
You
was
hear that?
so fantastic, with the drums when they came in and Cocker and, the whole thing was just one of the great, great singles and still is.
Yes.
You can look back, classic. So I was very lucky like that. On another occasion, around the same time, I was up in Apple Music in
Oh,
Baker
okay.
Street in their
Yeah.
shop,
Yeah.
and I went upstairs and this guy came and said, um, you know, have you got time to have a listen? I don't know whether we were all doing that in those days, basically buttonholing people and saying, listen, come and listen to this music, tell me what you think. But anyway, this tall, lanky guy, American guy actually, came and said, would you have a listen to this? So we went up, and there again was a record player in the corner on a table, and he put this album on, and I sat there, and at the end of it, I really wasn't that moved, but I was very polite and said, no, it sounds good. It's really interesting and some very nice songs. And that was it, but it wasn't rock and roll. So, I mean, I was surprised by what I was asked to listen to, if you like, but he had no idea. I was
Yeah.
just somebody in the shop.
Yeah. It
And
wasn't. It wasn't James Taylor. It
it
wasn't.
was James Taylor.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was it was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
album that he made
Yeah.
for Apple,
Yes.
um,
Yes, he did.
Beatles. And you
Yes,
look
he did.
back now, and it was he was brought over here, I think, by Peter Asher, who was
Yeah.
very closely connected with the Beatles through Jane Asher, who was McCartney's girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. So that was that. And the other thing that happened around about that time, again, I was up in an offices up in the West End of London. Said, "Would you be? You live in South Kensington. Could you take this package home, and or could you take this package and deliver it to this address? It's nearby you." So I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." And found the address, and it was one of these very tall Victorian buildings with, 8, 9 floors or something like that. We don't build them big in this country. I mean, not like you.
Right.
We went in and it had one of those rickety old lifts, elevators, and with a sort of um, doors that you'd pull across, the iron doors and
Yes.
so forth. So I think I went up to the third or the fourth floor or something, and I went to try and find the flat. And as I got to the door, I noticed next to the door, and under the doorbell was a notice which said, "If you are not expected here, do not ring this bell. If you don't know anybody here, do not ring this bell.
Do
Without
not.
an appointment, do not ring this bell." It was what we called, you were seriously vibed out. It was like,
Yes. Yes. You're
do
right.
not ring this
Do
doorbell.
not. Do not.
And I thought, I've got this package here. I've got to deliver it. So, very nervously, I pressed the doorbell
Yeah.
and waited. And a couple of minutes later, the door opened. It was Jimi Hendrix.
Oh,
Um, and that was his
what?
his his flat.
Yeah.
And he invited me in. This was about, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It looked like he'd only just got up. But he made me a cup of tea, and I had sat in his living room. He was kind enough to, and we chatted for a bit. And I knew exactly who he was because I'd seen him at the Market Club like a week beforehand. Charming, quiet,
Yes.
shy
Yes.
gentleman,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
who transformed the moment he walked out on stage and plugged in.
Yes.
Um, so I've dined out on that story for many years, particularly with young people who know who Jimi Hendrix is. Yeah,
Right. You had a personal sit down with him like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Most other artists I've talked to just only played with him or saw him in
yeah,
concert. But wow,
yeah,
that's a
sure.
nice
Yeah, yeah.
that's a nice
We
story.
all used to hang out at the Speakeasy and the Revolution clubs, where all the musicians, at the end of the night, after they'd been gigging around, would go back there and jam.
Yeah.
And I saw some extraordinary jam sessions with artists that if you only had a recorder in those days,
Oh, I
you could
know.
have made a fortune,
Oh, you got
Hendrix and Steve Winwood and Keith Moon and so on and so forth, all playing up on the stage. After that night's band had finished, they were persuaded to leave their gear there so that whoever wanted to get up and jam could do so.
could do that. Could jam also. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it
Well,
was Hendrix that brought that whole jamming scene from New York to London.
yeah, yeah,
There was a little bit of it there, but it was actually he that, he would get up and play with anybody. And,
yeah.
we started thinking, oh, this is actually quite cool.
Yes,
So a
yes,
lot of people got into it and got into the jam scene.
yes, yes. He helped ignite that exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
indeed.
going back I want to mention my favorite from the first album
Right.
is Spring '69. That's my favorite track.
Yeah, yeah. That was written by Angus as a sort of acoustic piece, and it's still an acoustic piece, although, there's now piano and stuff in it and, keyboard. We Cressida went and played at a gig in a French chateau. And it was an open air thing where they had a huge marquee, and for some reason we were the band that played that. And Angus, the next day we were stayed there for 3 days in the chateau itself, and later on they had beautiful grounds and gardens, and Angus was walking through this. So I understand anyway. That was his muse, if you like, for
The,
Spring '69.
the inspiration behind it.
Yeah,
and,
indeed.
and then two more tracks, Down, Down, and Tomorrow is a Whole New Day. I like both of those.
Down, down. Oh, can't remember who wrote Down, down. When it was Peter, no, I suspect again it was either John or Angus. Um, but again, a very atmospheric song,
Yeah.
um, and the arrangement was so. I remember, I think I played the toms with beaters and stuff, um, and so it was really more about creating a mood, a feeling, if you like, behind that song. Tomorrow's a whole new day. That was I wrote that.
Ah,
It was
okay.
that was the
Okay.
time when I thought, listen, I know about how I can, I know about how to play the piano. So I went away and I sat down and played it and rather nervously took it along, and they all went, yeah, we like that.
They
And
like
so
it.
before he knew it, we
Yeah.
were in the studio and recording. I mean, I personally now kind of tend to squirm a little bit when it comes when it's played, but
Oh,
I
do
think
you?
I think a lot of people do that when they look back to
Yeah.
what they did 45, 50 years ago,
Yes,
It's quite a long
exactly.
time.
Right. It was of its time. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't, hope you don't take offense of this, but I don't like the second album, Asylum, as much as the first.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
But I do like the track Lisa. I do like that.
okay. What's interesting, I think, about the second album is that on the first album, we had discovered a thing called a mellotron, which was
Yeah.
in
Right.
Wessex Studios.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I'm pretty certain it probably was the same mellotron that King Crimson used on Court of the King's Crim, because
Right.
that's where they recorded Wessex. I've never really thought about that before, but because there were awful things to move around because they went
They
out of
were so heavy. Yeah.
so,
Yes.
so easily. But anyway, so Peter played the mellotron on several of the tracks on the first album. Come the second album, I think Ozzy Byrne, our producer, felt he wanted to get a proper orchestra in. Okay. And got an arranger in who listened to, several of the tracks and added orchestra um, arrangements. Some of which I think really didn't work, and some of which worked okay. Okay. Um, Lisa, I think, was written about. I know exactly the Lisa in question. So I know that was Angus's, but again, it is quite progressive in a way because it goes through different, phases and aspects, as does Munich, which is Peter's one. Personally, I like Munich better than Lisa
Okay, all right.
because I think some of the playing on Munich, and particularly Peter's, is really, exemplary, beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not to decry what he did, but on anything else, in case you're watching. But I think at the same time, we were excited about having a real orchestra in the studio, but feeling that the whole kind of decision making was a bit out of our hands because the producer had brought in Graham Hall and who said, okay, here it is. And we didn't feel confident enough to say, no, we don't like that
Yeah, yeah,
because, Ozzy had paid for him to do it and Ozzy
yeah,
wouldn't have been pleased. So
yeah,
in those days, we kind of lacked that sort of level of security and self-confidence in order to be able to stand up for ourselves
yeah.
because we still hadn't yet had a successful record. It's interesting. A lot of people say that for them, Asylum is better than the first album, and that's
Oh, is that right?
because of the final track, the Let Them Come When They Will, which is a
Okay.
John Hayworth song.
Yeah.
Um, we used to do these, all of the stuff that we recorded. I think just about everything. Don't have any exceptions. They were stage music. They were stuff that we'd been playing on stage for some considerable time. So by the time you got into the studio, you knew the songs fairly well. And we were playing regularly on the sort of club circuit and playing at the Speakeasy and the Revolution. So songs like Let Them Come
Yeah.
When They were really a kind of extended jam
Yes.
because they were, improvised sections where each, of the musicians had an opportunity to sort of, extemporize, if you like. Um, but that to me, there are tracks that I really like on the first album, and there are tracks I really like on the second,
Okay.
because it's rare that any one album is absolutely, gold from track to track.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
those are the
Well, you
you know.
you you mentioned mellotron. It's one of my favorite instruments, and
Mm.
with King Crimson and also Moody Blues. Moody
Yeah,
Blues, they use that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I love that sound that you can
yeah,
get from that. Wow.
yeah.
Well, you mentioned live too. I forgot to ask you who were some of the bands that you played in support of, or that were on the same bill.
Well, we did a very memorable tour with a Vertigo tour with Black Sabbath
Okay.
when they just about during which they were told that their first album or their album had just gone to number one for the first time. And we were all in a restaurant together in Brussels when that news came through, and it was a fairly raucous afternoon of celebrations.
Yeah.
And we were a much quieter band, I think, than some of the others. I mean, and therefore, perhaps we were less inclined to behave badly in restaurants, especially abroad in front of people that clearly were upset at what was going on around them. So, but anyway, hey, that's rock and roll. Yeah, that was quite a memorable tour. One of the most interesting gigs that we ever played was in Bratislava in Czechoslovakia. We certainly were the first British band to play behind the Iron Curtain at that time. We were playing at the Marquee Club in London, and we played there several times. And on one occasion, one night after the gig, or at the end of the gig, this couple came into the dressing room and said, love the gig, would you be interested in coming to play in Czechoslovakia? And we all laughed and went, yeah, of course, thinking this is mad, Czechoslovakia. We even then knew that it was behind the Iron Curtain, that no bands went there. So anyway, much to our amazement, we actually received a letter from them saying, it's going to be this major rock festival, pop festival, being held in Bratislava, and later on in the year. And how many tickets will we need? Flights, and wanted to negotiate fees and so forth. So we eventually realized they were serious. And we, eventually found ourselves getting on a plane from London Heathrow to Prague with about three other people, a huge plane, but very few people were flying from the UK or Britain to Czechoslovakia at that time, and then on an internal flight down to Bratislava, where we were the only Western band on the bill. All the rest of them were either East German or from other Soviet countries. And it was actually sponsored by the state, as everything would have been in those days.
Yeah, of
And it was televised. And there
course.
was this little band without a single, hit record, completely unknown virtually in our own country, being invited to top the bill at this, gig in Bratislava. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And before we were there for about 3 days, I think, over a long weekend. And because we were wearing our normal street clothes, little old ladies, babushkas, would come up and sort of stroke your fur coat and look at you as if, some people had just descended from Mars. Now, I know that a lot of us during those days that went to strange and unusual countries to play would have had exactly the same reaction. Um, but there was no record of it, no way to be able to find out whether the television show had actually been recorded. I do remember an interesting event which happened during that, which reflected that we were behind the Iron Curtain and not in the land of democratic freedoms.
Yeah.
And that was when it was a huge venue, great big concrete and glass, a modern, concert hall. And in the foyer upstairs, it was, very, very large. And on the Saturday afternoon, I think, we were waiting to go on and do our sound check. And we were standing around up there, and Kevin, the bass player, sat down on the floor. Because, we were tired. We probably hadn't gone to bed the night beforehand, actually, and drinking all night. And this guard came along with a, heavily armed and booted and said, up, get up off the floor. And Kevin, being bolshy and British, and oh, I'm tired. I want to sit on the floor. What's wrong? And he started to get quite irate, the guard. And within about, I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute, everybody else that was on that floor sat down.
Wow.
All the Czech people that were there
Yeah.
sat on the ground. And
Yes.
suddenly he knew, I can't do anything about this. And
Not
kind
too
of
many.
quickly left,
Yeah.
and then
Oh, so,
everybody got up, including Kevin. But it was a show even then
yeah.
of what, if you like, a very small protest can
Yes.
actually do in a totalitarian.
Solidarity. Solidarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
The most extraordinary thing, to be honest, Greg, was just 6 months ago on the internet one day. I was sent a photograph of us performing on that stage that night. We had never seen it before. And it was a really fine photograph. It was taken obviously by the official photographer. And so we actually do have a record of us, playing in Bratislava and one of the first bands. I think this would have been 69 that actually went behind the Iron Curtain and played, certainly in Czechoslovakia. So that's quite a story. Nice.
Well, have you posted that picture?
Um, do you know, I don't think I have, because we've got our own website
Yeah.
that we built. I don't think we have.
Yeah.
I will get that
That, that
sorted
would be that
because
would
it's such a good photograph and it's such an interesting photograph
yeah.
as to kind of the stage outfits and the setup of the band. No, I will put it up on the Cressida
Yeah.
website to be able
Yes.
to look at. I will
I'm
see that
sure.
that's done.
I'm sure fans and others would love to see that. They see that
Yeah,
picture there. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
the album second was released after the band had broken up. Why did the band break up?
Well, I think the bottom line was that we weren't getting enough gigs. The first album sold, I think about 15,000 copies in the country, which was pretty good in those days for a brand new album. I mean, every week there were dozens and dozens of albums being released.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and that's why we got a second album. Olaf Wiper, who was the head of Vertigo Records, he basically agreed to put out a second album because he believed in us. We only really found out to what extent he believed in us years and years later. My initial reaction was, why didn't you see something at the time?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the website has got a classic quote from him on about Cressida and how, in his view, the first album was the finest that was of that whole Vertigo catalogue.
Okay.
But said nothing to us about how he felt about it. Or if he did, he only told the manager, who
Uh,
didn't tell us. Okay, so it can happen like that sometimes. Anyway, um, yeah. And because we weren't getting gigs, and the gigs were the way of promoting albums, we could see, and Ozzy, whilst he was a good record producer, he didn't really know very much about promoting bands. Um, and uh, and as the gigs started to get fewer and fewer, so that there was an increasing amount of frustration in the band. And I certainly would have been one of the first, I think I remember, in saying, unless something changes, we can't carry on like this. Yeah, the band broke up just before the album was released. I joined Heap fairly, I know you'll come on to this, but I joined Heap fairly shortly after that. And I remember being with them on the first gig that I went to play with them in the bus, driving along, and on the evening, late afternoon radio program, Heap's third album and Cressida's second album were played back to back and reviewed
Back to back.
back to
Wow.
back. And Cressida's got like 4 or 5 stars,
Yeah.
and Heap's got about 2 or 3. And I wanted to just curl up and disappear.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I had been in that band, but I'd left them and I was now in this band.
Yeah,
I knew I'd made the right decision, by the way, but as
yeah,
far as the reviewers and the press were concerned,
yeah.
they liked the Christopher album a great deal,
Yeah,
and less so Salisbury, although
yeah, yeah,
there will
Salisbury.
be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of fans that would dispute that
Yes,
quite
right,
rightly, quite properly. Yeah,
right. Well,
yeah.
what were the circumstances that led you to join Uriah Heep?
I answered an ad in Melody Maker again.
Moneymaker. Okay.
The interesting thing was that Cressida had played with them and been on the same bill with them. So they knew who we were and they knew who I was. And although they'd certainly had at least 1 or even 2 rounds of um, auditions and they hadn't found anybody, um, the outcome of that was that they said, "Oh, yeah, come along," and they didn't call it an audition. Come along and play with us. But it was an audition as far as I was concerned, um, and that went very well. Can I divert for one
Sure,
minute to something
sure,
else that's just occurred to me as I'm
sure.
talking about that one, which was another audition I went to. I think it was after I left Cressida, and I was looking around for bands. Um, in fact, this was an audition I didn't go to. Um, I had been working in town for 3 or 4 days and was going back out to where I lived in North London. And one afternoon, I think it was a Thursday or a Friday, I came out to an underground railway station in North London called North Wembley Station. And as I walked up the stairs and went through the ticket area, coming round to go into the station was a guy that I knew who was a bass player, and he'd been in a band called Plastic Penny, and he'd made
Oh,
some
yes, I'm
couple of
familiar
couple
with
of
it.
hit records for them. And he said, as we bumped into each other, said, Ian, I've been trying to contact you for, 2 or 3 days. I've got a session for you. Would you be interested in coming? But you have to come now. And I went, oh man, I haven't been in bed for 2 nights. I need to get home and just sleep and rest. He said, oh, come on, we just get on the train, we'll go up to town. It's at Dick James's music, okay? And I said, oh, no, no, I'll pass on this. And I did. And I went home and slept. And so a few months later, I bumped into him at the speakeasy and said, oh, yeah, how you doing? And I said, how did that session go that you went to? He said, oh, yeah, it was for a guy called Elton John.
Yeah,
And
right.
so it was Nigel Olsson,
Nigel,
who
no.
had been the drummer
Yeah,
in Plastic Penny,
yes, yes.
who basically went and did the Elton John session.
That's right. That's right.
And it could have been me. And it's one of those,
It's
many examples of where at that time, your career, you come to a crossroads or you come to a fork and you go, I'll go that way,
right, right,
as opposed to that way.
right.
No regrets,
Yeah,
looking back now, but
right.
it's
One,
stuck in
one,
my mind. I thought,
one,
gee whiz,
one decision can just put you on a different
absolutely.
projection. Yeah, and
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 time
it can change your
and,
life.
and timing and luck too.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Those
yeah,
factors, right?
yeah.
Well, another, yeah, from Plastic Penny, Paul Raymond, the keyboardist in that band, went on to play with UFO, one of my
Yes,
favorite bands. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
We used to go and see, we rehearsed at the same place as Plastic Penny did. In Willesden, and so that's how I kind of got to know the guys and stuff. So anyway, yeah,
Nigel, yes, yes,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah. Good
Well,
drummer, a really good drummer too.
yes, yes,
Terrific drummer.
very good. Well, you would play on the Look at Yourself recording from '71, and I want to
Yeah,
show I still have my vinyl copy here, and I liked it because of the gimmick that they have where you can actually look in a
yeah,
mirror,
yep,
and see
yep,
yourself. There we go.
yep,
There's the
yep,
eyes above it, and then
yep.
of course, this is all so many fingerprints and everything
Of
on
course.
it. It's not as good as when it first came out. And then
Yeah,
I'll just hold up the back side of it
yeah,
too, there
yes,
too. So there's
yeah.
that album. Still have that. But one of my favorite Uriah Heep albums, actually, not just saying that because I'm talking to you, but Jill, the title track is
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
I Want to Be Free.
yeah.
Another one. My favorite track is July Morning. That's my favorite.
I
Yeah.
think that is probably in the top three of fans' favorite Uriah Heep songs of all time.
Yeah.
And there've been countless, top 10 tracks, top three records, whatever. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, now looking back on it, I went to see Heap very recently when Mick was doing a tour and came and played in Glasgow, and I, went down and hooked
He's,
up. And it wasn't the first time I saw him, 3 years
he's,
before that when they were
he's
playing.
the only surviving.
He is absolutely. And it was great because I thought they were brilliant. I honestly thought they were absolutely brilliant. Um, but do you know what? Out of their set list of 9, 10 tracks, three were from the Look at Yourself album. Three,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they recorded 20 odd albums.
Yes, that's right.
So they did Look at Yourself. They did July Morning, of course.
Yes.
And they did Shadows of Grief,
Oh, okay. Another track from there. Yes. Yes. That,
which says something
I
about
was going to say it does.
what the fans actually really want to hear,
Right.
or more importantly, what the band want to play to their fans now.
Right. Right.
Um, so yes, I mean, I
Mhm.
think after Demons and Wizards, which was the album afterwards,
Yeah.
I think people do tend to say that Look at Yourself is one of their
Yeah.
top three albums of all. So
Yes.
I was very lucky. I mean, to be there and I enjoyed my time with the band.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
yeah,
one more track. If you, I don't know if you remember this one, but my CD, I have a CD version too, and it has extra tracks. Extended version of Tears in My Eyes on there,
yeah,
which I
yeah,
prefer. I prefer over the album version. I
yeah,
like that.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
It's interesting. It was years after I left the music industry as a performer that CDs were being released, which had unreleased tracks recorded
Yeah, yeah,
with, with me,
yeah,
one of which was called Why, which had been recorded for the subsequent album with Lee on drums,
yeah.
um, uh, which I think was one of the best things they'd ever recorded personally, because it's such a groove that Paul and myself had got into. And, I can remember the moment when it suddenly, Paul started doing this riff, I started playing, and I looked around and everybody went, this is something, go for it. And David ran out, wrote down some lyrics in the bar.
Yeah.
We were rehearsing in Chiswick, and Ken started putting chords on it and mixed it. And I've got a live recording of the second time we played that through. That's never been released. Another example, I think, that we were talking about earlier of the, if you like, unreleased version having something special.
Yes.
And this was because we were playing it really for the second time. What I had forgotten was that we were recording Look at Yourself. We laid down a version of Why. It didn't ultimately make it onto the final cut for the album. But 35, 40 years later, I heard it for the first time, even though it'd been subsequently recorded with Lee for the follow-up album. Um, but yes, I mean, it was, there was some interesting um, aspects of that album because some of the guys from Osibisa came into the
Oh,
studio and lay
yes.
the
Yeah.
percussion on top of Look at Yourself. Manfred Mann came in and laid down the Moog synthesizer at the end of July Morning. Um, and yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. Heavily influenced by an album that I introduced to the band, which I'd be amazed that anybody's ever heard of, actually, but it would have to be an American if anybody's heard of them. A band called Touch.
Ye- Now, I was gonna say yes, but I don't know. I don't know. Touch. What
Right.
time period? What time period?
This will be 69, 70.
Touch. And what kind of music? Touch.
Oh, I mean, it's almost indescribable. It's certainly heavily influenced by the sort of psychedelia on one hand.
Okay.
Go and Google them sometime and look them up because I remember writing to the record company. I think it was Warner's that
Yes.
had them on.
Yes.
They they were founded by the keyboard player from the band that recorded Louie Louie,
Oh, the Kingsman. Yeah.
the Kingsmen.
Yes.
He
Yes.
was the leader. He
Yes.
was too young to tour,
Yes.
with the Kingsmen. I think
Yes.
he was something like 14 or 15 when he did some of that, those early recordings. But anyway, he went and set up a band called Touch, and there was a whole myth built around it. So, for example, the story goes that they rented a castle. The record company rented a castle outside of Los Angeles to go and record this album, and they were there for weeks and weeks, if not months. And such was the rumors that started to filter down the hill, down the mountains into Los
Yeah.
Angeles, that it led to people like Mick Jagger going and visiting, Jimi
Oh,
Hendrix going and visiting,
yes.
because
Yes.
the studios were saying,
Yes.
listen, you should go up and check this out.
Yes.
So read the story because it's fascinating. The album is stupendous,
Wow.
absolutely stupendous.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
um, and I took it into the studio
Yeah.
and and you will hear direct things on that. And the guys in the heat went,
Yeah.
oh yeah, let's
Yeah.
do that. And some of the effects, it was full of, it is full of terrific, special effects, fade outs and all sorts of weird sounds and so forth. Um, it's a singular concept album.
Okay.
But they couldn't perform it live on stage, and the record company, who had wanted them to, I think, go out and support
Yeah.
Moody Blues.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Is it
Basically, they refused because they knew that they could not replicate on stage what they performed on the record.
on the record? It was
And
difficult.
the record company basically dropped them, and that was it. So they only ever made one album,
Yeah.
and it
Oh,
disappeared. Legendary.
I
Touch.
will.
And
I
the
will.
album is called Touch as well.
It's the album's called that is so interesting because I'm working on having an interview with one of the members of the Kingsmen,
Okay.
Dick Peterson, who did Louis.
Right.
And so
Okay.
that would be very interesting to,
Ask him about,
yeah,
yeah,
touch. I would definitely will. Wow, how interesting. Doing these, the more and more I do, I find a lot of common threads, and connections,
yeah.
between members and bands. Well, very, very cool. Well, how was the tour, the 71 tour with Uriah Heep?
Um, Exciting. Very, very exciting. We were taken under their wing by Three Dog Night. So we did a whole tour with Three Dog Night, who
Okay.
at that time were just gigantic. I mean, they were selling out 20,000 seat, stadia all over. And we went on the road with them, and they were one of the craziest bands on the road. They became legendary for their overindulgence in everything that one could overindulge in. And I believe they've actually, there's actually a book about their stories on the road. But they were terrific. They treated us like kind of younger brothers that they were introducing life on the road to. And this
Okay.
is how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were just bowled over by America because we'd all grown up seeing the movies and we American culture, post-war culture really had a huge influence on other Western countries and Britain in particular because of the common language. So we'd seen the Hollywood movies, we'd seen the all the favorite television movies, and suddenly we were there in the streets of New York and the streets of Los Angeles, the streets of Chicago, and enjoying ourselves and um, really getting very, very good reception from the audiences. We broke out in the Midwest. We didn't understand initially what breaking out meant, but it meant that America was so big, you have to start somewhere, and it
Yeah.
just so happened to be there.
Okay.
And Yeah, I mean, we had some memorable times. Blew some, certainly one very famous band off stage. They were going back for their third, fourth, fifth time to this particular city in their auditorium, and we were supporting them. And the crowd demanded a encore from us, and their stage manager, the road manager, was going to pull the plug on us, and the promoter said, "No, you don't." And we went on, and a third of the audience left by the time that the top bill had come on, and we thought, "Blimey!" Especially when we bumped into them back at the hotel, who were staying at the same hotel, and it was a rather sort of embarrassed meeting in the lift as we went upstairs.
Imagine.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
I mean, some of the guys were really pissed off, and
Yeah.
others just took it in their stride.
They're getting
It's the
strong.
old story.
Yeah.
You don't know who you're going to meet when you're on your way up,
That's right.
because at
That's
some
right.
point you're going to come back down again. So,
That's right.
best to stay friends with all of them.
You need to humble yourself. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Wow, wow, wow. Well, very cool. Yes. Well, fast forwarding, the mentioned in the intro, 2011, Cressida would reunite and reform to coincide with the issue of that Lost Tapes album.
yeah,
Uh, and the band played a reunion gig in December of
yeah.
that year. Yeah. How was that?
Wonderful.
How was that getting back together after all that time?
Okay. I had a phone call one day. I had sent out a list of all the vinyl records that I was looking to sell. And I picked about half a dozen music stores, record stores around the UK and said, "Are you interested in buying my record collection?" And one guy phoned me back immediately and said, Yeah, we might be interested. Where are you? And I said, well, actually, I'm in the Highlands of Scotland. He went, oh my God, nothing to drive in America, but in the UK, that's quite a long drive, 10 hours.
Yeah.
And he said, but actually, I want to know something. How come you've got five Cressida albums? We've always wondered what happened to Cressida. And I said, well, actually, I used to be in the band. And he went, you are joking. Within 48 hours, he and his partner had driven all the way from Reading, outside London, up to the Highlands of Scotland to see me,
Yes. Yes.
ostensibly to check out my record collection, but
Oh,
actually to say, do you have any unreleased material? And I said, no, I don't think so. And I said, look, let me check around with the other guys, because thanks to the internet, all the members of the band were in touch with each other now, via email. Occasionally it wasn't close knit, but we'd actually hooked up again because Kevin was living in LA, Angus was living in France, I was living in the Highlands of Scotland, and Peter was living in the south of England. And so I basically started phoning around and I said, do we have any unreleased material? Whatever happened to the demos? And Angus in France said, you've got them. And I went, what do you mean I've got them? And he said, they're upstairs in your. I lived in a stables block in a very large house with a extended stables. And I went up there and I looked through these cardboard boxes, and sure enough, were all these half-inch tapes,
oh.
absolutely and
Wow.
one of them was labeled Sound, Central Sound Studios demos. So I got out my old turntable or record player, sorry, my tape recorder, and wound it on. And just as I was about to say play, I thought something said, stop. This, you might be actually shredding
Ooh,
because they've not been played for
that's forever. Long time.
45 years or something.
Right. Right.
So I took it off very carefully and I looked around and found, a top specialist in digitizing and saving tapes. And so I sent them off to him, and then he sent me back the digital files for them. But the real reason that these guys wanted to know if I had any was because they had been talking to Record Collector magazine in the UK, which is the industry magazine for vinyl, who said, we'd love to get hold of anything that was unreleased by Cressida. And that's what they were asking for. And when I said, yes, we got it, I immediately flew to London, met with
There,
Record,
yeah.
and they said, we'd like to do a limited edition vinyl release of the unreleased demos. And so I went into the studio, we got them remastered and then gave them to Record Collector. And so the guys for the first time actually earned a little bit of money from the sale of those original demo tapes that had never been released before. And whilst we were in the middle of discussions and negotiations about putting the album together, Ian Shirley from Record Collector said, I don't suppose there's any chance of you guys doing another gig, is there? And this is like, we're not talking now, almost 50 years
Yeah.
since we
Yeah.
played.
Yes.
And I said, doubt it, but I'll ask. And I phoned around, but I left one person until last because he had always said, no way am I ever going to get back again, together again. And anyway, I don't really like the idea of bands getting together again after 30 or 40 years to play. So I phoned around everybody else and they all went, yeah, I'll do it. And then I phoned Angus, who was the last one. And I said, Angus, I know you're not going to believe this, but we've had an invitation to actually reform the band for a gig in London. Are you up for it? And he went, yeah.
Yeah. Then he was. Yeah.
Completely contradicting everything he'd ever said. He went, yeah.
Right. Right.
So that was it. So a date was set. Um, on that date, I'd arranged for all the guys to come and stay in the Highlands of Scotland because I had space for setting up gear because we hadn't literally played together for nearly 50 years. And it was interesting. I got in gear from other people. I was the only one who was still playing. I was playing part-time in a blues band in Inverness. and Kevin, the bass player, had retired about 5 years previously when he was in LA. The others hadn't done anything music-wise. Peter, the keyboard player, a little bit, but you know. Anyway, we got together at my place, and the first evening we sat around for a big dinner, and we just reminisced and kind of got to know each other again. And then the next morning we went through to start going through some of the numbers. I remember sitting, I mean, can never, some of these moments get seared into your memory.
Yeah.
Sitting behind the kit and saying to them, so do you think we're going to remember them? Okay.
Yeah.
And, there was a kind of, I think so.
Yeah.
Um, and so off we went. And I think it might have been Lights in My Mind, might have been the first song that we did, or, one of the others. And for the first half an hour, I thought, what have we done? What have I done? We've got a date to go to London and play. We've got, okay, the album's coming out, that's fine, but we've now committed because it had to get into the diary like 6 months, ahead. And we've never rehearsed for, and we're not going to really have another chance to rehearse because we all live all over the bloody world.
Yeah.
And I was really kind of nervous because we were struggling, how did that win there? Where did that go? And then we said, okay, let's break for lunch. Went had some lunch, came back and carried on. And about 20 minutes later, it suddenly clicked.
Oh, did it?
And it
Okay.
was great. It
Yeah.
was,
Yes.
we all started
Yeah.
smiling. It was like,
The
yeah, we
the
do
ma
know this
the
and we know
magic
how to do it.
the magic
Yeah,
was, yeah, yeah,
it
that's
was
right.
there.
Yeah.
And so then we all, kind of went back to our lives and then got together again a week before the gig and did the same thing in up in my place, and went to do a gig in London and absolutely stunned by the number of people that turned up.
Uh,
They came from Brazil,
yeah.
from Russia. I mean, because of the internet, the kind of community of people that knew about Cressida
Got
and were
around.
interested to go actually hear them live was quite something.
Yeah.
And uh, we were completely blown away by
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of
Yeah.
friends and family flew down from the Highlands to see us.
To see you. Yeah.
And that was that. And that led on to a couple of other gigs because the 2 nights before we were due to get to London, we were all in my place one evening when the phone rang, and it was a guy in London who introduced himself and as the leader of a band called Cathedral,
Oh,
and
okay. Okay.
said that they were playing on the Saturday night. I think ours was the Friday night. And one of the bands that was due to be on the bill with them had just dropped out, and he had heard because he was already planning on coming to see us play, at the venue that we were playing at on the Friday night. Would we be interested in coming and playing the next night with them? And by this time, it was like in for a penny, in for a pound, as we say over here. Yeah, why
Yeah.
not? So
Right.
we
Right.
turned up and did a second gig. So flew home and thought, okay, well, that's the end of it. We all shook hands at, Heathrow Airport and all flew off in our separate ways. But we didn't know that there would be another gig, which came completely out the blue, which was put together by one of our biggest fans, a guy called Michael Ackerfeld from a band called Opeth,
Oh, yes. I'm familiar with Opus. Yes. Yes. A Swedish,
because
Swedish. Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
kind of goth death metal band.
Yes.
And when the website had been built, we got a letter via the website introducing himself and saying, I'm one of Cressida's biggest fans and were a huge influence on my writing in Opeth. And I thought, I had remembered reading an article several years beforehand about a Swedish band or a Swedish songwriter who'd expressed his interest in, his influences by Cressida. But I didn't follow it up in any way until he arrived. He got in contact, and I thought, I think this might be the same guy that I read about. Anyway, he said, he was delighted to hear about the band and because he'd been a huge fan and had never stopped promoting to others in the press, in the media, who of his two or three biggest influences were, which we thought was extraordinary. Anyway, I went and Googled him and found out he had 1.25 million followers, and I thought, oh, okay. I'm somewhat shamefaced. I realized that he was an extremely well known to a
Yes.
lot of people. The key was he couldn't come to see us in London because he was touring in the States with Opeth. At the time, we were going to do the London reunion,
Yeah.
but he went out of his way to put information about the London reunion on the Opeth site,
Oh,
which has, a lot of followers. So
yes.
that helped, I think, to raise the awareness first about the band and also about the reunion. Then I got a call from somebody to say there's a gig being put on, which goes on every year or two, on a boat that sails from Stockholm in Sweden to Riga in Latvia. And it has about 6 or 7 stages, and we get about 20 odd bands. Would you be interested in coming and playing on it? And I said, well, I don't know. We haven't played now for about 6 years again. I'm not sure everybody will be up for it. And then he said, an Opeth are topping the bill.
Oh,
Well, subsequently, we found out that Michael Ackerfeld went to the promoter, who's a good friend of his, and said, "Look, okay, this is a apocryphal story, but we'll do the gig if you get Cressida," because
oh,
he wanted to see us live. So that's how we ended up doing another gig that when we thought it was all over
yeah.
on this boat, and we had a wonderful time. And I was just so blown away by Opeth. They were absolutely brilliant. Um, but all because of Michael Ackerfeld
Right.
finding
Right.
for some extraordinary reason, because when I started to listen to some of Opus non-progressive music, because
Yeah.
they've bridged this from death metal and goth music
Yes.
into the
Yeah.
progressive field.
Right. Right.
I listened to some of
Yeah.
the non-progressive music and
Yeah.
thinking, how
Yeah.
possibly could we have influenced that?
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
he's a
Well,
lovely guy, and I haven't been in touch with him for a wee while, but yeah, a real gentleman, lovely man.
do you know Stephen Wilson?
I don't, but I obviously know of him. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And because
UK progressive musician.
absolutely,
He collaborated with Opeth,
yeah,
Porcupine Tree,
yeah,
Blackfield. He's played with a lot of different bands, but
yeah,
really, really talented. Really,
yeah.
yeah. Check out some of his
I
stuff.
will do.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
you'll like. I think you'll like it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Well,
I knew that he did a number of collaborations with Michael
yes,
Ackerfeld in
yes,
particular, you
yes,
know.
yeah. Yes, he did. Yes, he has. Well, was that your last gig, the 2013 with Cressida?
I
Was
think
it?
it must have been, yes, indeed. Yeah. And I doubt whether there'll be another one, I'm afraid,
Okay,
Greg.
that was
So,
that was my fault.
those that saw it, and those that didn't won't ever have the chance, I think. But there you
Okay,
go.
okay.
That's life, as they
Well,
say.
well, I want to hear briefly about Twisted Blues um, from the
Hmm.
album from 2020.
Hmm. Yeah. Twisted Blues, uh, they were a three-piece blues band, guitarist, bass player, and drummer. And we had been playing together for about 15 years, 16 years, locally up here in bars in and around the main city of Inverness, where I live near. And we did, we were sort of a covers band, but we could play. And the bass player, Bobby McDonald, um, good songwriter and played good slide. And he said, like, I'd like to do a recording. And I said to him, look, if you're serious about it, we shouldn't do it over here. We should go to New Orleans. I said, it's the best place to go. And we'll have such fun
Yeah.
because you won't believe the music scene in New Orleans.
Yes.
So that's what we did. And we flew out there and we spent a week in the studios in New Orleans and laid down, 10, 11 tracks. And it was really a self-publishing, sometimes called a vanity publishing effort. It's there for friends and family, and we sold some at gigs and stuff, you know. Um, but I'm very proud of some of the stuff that we did on that, and Roger, the guitarist, and Bobby, the bass player, and myself. And then we went out in the evenings to see what was going on around town. We also did a gig in town, just off not Basing Street,
Detected at the front door.
one of the main drags in New Orleans, and it was a bar. There were very few people there until we started playing All Right Now by Free, and people went, "Oh,"
I know
and
that. I know
sort of poured in
that.
to the
Right.
bar because it's a whole street music scene, you know.
Yes, yes.
And then they realised actually we were British,
Yeah.
and we're playing some British classics, and that changed the whole kind of vibe in there. And suddenly people went, "Oh yeah, this is good," you know. So anyway, we
Well,
enjoyed
I,
that, but
I,
we broke up. I hung up my
yeah.
sticks
Okay. Well,
about 7, 8 years ago, and I last played at my wedding, 8 years ago. And I wanted to quit before A, people said, "Oh, you should have seen him a few years ago when he could play,"
yeah,
or
yeah,
B, before other members saying, "You know what, Ian, I think it's time for you to kind of, step back or let a younger one in." And
yeah,
so I left on my own terms, and
yeah,
I still miss it from time to time,
yeah,
but I'm so busy
yeah.
doing other things
Right,
that,
right. Well, it's
yeah,
when music is in you, it's always going to be there.
yeah,
Your
sure,
whole life, your whole life. So,
absolutely,
yes, yes.
yeah,
Well, you said you're close to Inverness. Is
yes,
oh, okay. Well, that's beautiful country.
it
Yeah,
is.
where you live. I am one half Scottish on my dad's side. Well, it's Scotch Irish is how
Yep,
what we found out when I did the tree. It's Scotch Irish, but more Scottish.
right.
So, and I think if I'm not wrong, I think it was from like the southwest part of Scotland. It's where
So that'll be
roots.
the borders or Dumfries and Galloway, that
Oh,
sort of part of Scotland.
okay. But
Yeah, yeah.
I've never been, but I've always wanted to go there.
Oh, you should do.
Yeah, I
And
know. I need
give us a
to.
call when you're up here, and
Okay,
I'll
before
point you in the right directions.
right before I
We
pass.
have a road up here called the North Coast 500. It's
Oh,
500 miles
yeah.
all the way around, and it's now listed as one of the three finest drives in the world
Oh, I can imagine.
because the scenery as you drive around the North Coast
Yes,
is
yes,
just stunning. So,
yes. And how many castles are around you?
oh,
Oh,
too many to count, that is for sure. Too many to count,
yeah,
And
yeah,
some are still lived in,
yeah.
but a lot of them are now ruins.
Oh,
But they have a magic about them because they are ruins too. Yeah.
yes. Do they have tours? Can you go through those? Yeah.
Yes, yep. Quite often you just pull the car into a car park and walk around it,
See,
through it.
I love history. That would be something, yeah, I would love to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of history up here.
Yeah. And how far from Loch Ness are you?
We live about 30 miles north of Inverness, and just outside a town called Tain, Tain, which is on right on the coast. So we can look out, and we look out over the water and the North Sea from where I am now.
Yeah.
Um, Loch Ness is just the other side of Inverness starts.
Yeah.
And so it'll be about 40 miles from where we are.
Okay.
But that's nothing here. I mean,
Yeah.
really, once you're up here,
Yeah.
we don't drive it every day if you can avoid it, but
Yeah.
you know, it's an easy drive. So yeah, come up to Loch Ness. You'll
Yeah.
see some
Yeah.
lovely countryside.
Yeah. Oh, I've only seen it on, TV and,
Yeah,
movies and,
yeah,
on the internet, not
yeah,
personally,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
I'd love to do that. Well,
Sure.
you picked a good spot. Yeah. You definitely picked a good spot.
And I should correct you on
Uh-huh.
your original introduction. You said I was English. I'm
Uh-huh.
half English and half Scottish. My
Oh,
mother was Scottish, my father was English. So I
okay.
moved back to the motherland.
Uh-huh.
And and as you realize, I spell Ian, not Ian, but Ian,
Right, right.
which is the Gaelic spelling,
The Gallic, yes. Yep, yep.
of John.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Well, my
Okay.
mother's side is German, and my dad's side Scotch Irish. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll ever make it to Germany, but
Make it to the Highlands if you do.
yes, that would be my first choice. That would be my
Yeah. Yeah.
all right. Well, Iain, it's been very enjoyable. I want to thank you again for doing
Not at
this,
all. Not at all.
and all the best to you. And you've got your recording, but I'll also send you mine as well, so you
Okay.
can. I mean, they
Please do.
should be the same. Should be pretty
Yeah.
much the same,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then it'll be on my channel as well. So
Great. Okay. And all the best to you as well, Greg. It's
all
been a
right.
great job.
All right.
Okay.
Well, it has. It has. All right. Well, bye bye for now, but not forever. Okay.
Okay. Take
All right.
care.
All right.
Bye
Bye.
now.